So what I did was I just toned the canvas a little bit, so I'm not painting on pure white, and right now it's still pretty wet. I just put a little bit of Gamsol in with the paint to thin it down, and usually it evaporates pretty fast. You can see it doesn't come off too easily, but I kind of prefer painting on it a little bit more dry. All right, so let's start the drawing. You'll notice in the setup that I grouped all the red apples together, so that can create a strong shadow shape to balance out the left side where the pear is behind, or the pear is in front of the dark value. And you'll notice there's a rhythm of different heights. So the pear is one level, the jar is one level, and then the apples are kind of like a waterfall. They go high, middle, low. And so there's kind of a circle there, but there's some nice asymmetry, and I isolated the pear against the dark area so it would stand out. If you squint your eyes, you'll notice that the apples kind of group together and they're similar in value to the background. So the vase or the jar is kind of the brightest contrasting element, so you could maybe say that's the focal point. But I think the pear is more interesting. It's closer to us. So the jar is kind of an opportunity to grab your attention. It's the impact, and then the pear is what I'm going to paint most accurately. So let's get into this. So you can see for my toned canvas that I just used, since you only have 3 colors, I used cadmium yellow, lemon. It's basically the same thing. You have the cad red light, black and white. So the painting's going to be kind of brownish. So I just toned my canvas with that color. And I'm just going to do the drawing in this kind of reddish brown color. And really for my drawing, all I do is just put in placement markers. So I'm saying how far do I want the pear from the edge. If I put it too close to the edge, it's going to feel like it's not important. So I'm going to put it about right here. So that's the edge of the pear. And then I'll scale the size. Since this board is pretty small, it's going to be smaller than life size. I want that close. You can see they're similar, mostly putting everything towards the middle. I think the pear is going to be down here. Go over. I'm going to put the apples up a little bit higher than they really are. Maybe we'll put that closer to the top. And so you notice that I'm not trying to draw objects, I'm just drawing shapes, placement of things. That really helps a lot. Okay, so got the pear, the bottom of the jar, the wooden deal. And you can move things around. If it doesn't look exactly like your reference, that's good. You want to get used to not copying. The more you copy, the less creative you are. I mean, obviously there's a certain amount of observation that you need to do, but you don't want to get sucked into, it's only correct if I copy it perfectly. That's a bad way of thinking. I did that for too many years, so I can speak from experience. It's not the best approach. Probably move that pear down a little bit more. And I don't want this vase thing, this milk jug, I don't know what you call it. I don't want to get it too close to the edge. So probably going to put it about right there. And you can see as I get going in my drawing, I'm making darker, more permanent marks. But mostly it's just a basic pattern of shapes. And I kind of feel like this is too centered. I kind of want to move it over. Maybe we'll move this over here. Don't be afraid to change things. Like I always tell, I don't know that I've said it too much in here because you guys are online mostly, but in my live classes I always talk about how design is the most important part of any image that you create. So what I'm doing now is just getting my design down so that it works. And I might make this pear a little bit more interesting because it's a plastic pear, so it's like totally perfectly straight up and down. So that's kind of boring to me. All right, so part of the design too is the cast shadow, or are the cast shadows. So when you're thinking about this, see how I have this negative shape here? I want to group the shadow shapes all together with my objects that are in shadow. So the edge of the apple is dark and it connects to the cast shadow and everything else that's in shadow. So that's kind of how you want to think about this, is based on where your shadow shapes are. And I'm just going to block in the shadow shapes. I don't normally do this at this stage, but I'm just going to block in the shadow shapes so you can see what I'm thinking. Well, I actually do this, but I do it with a bigger brush. So I'm just drawing in. Everything here is one shape, okay? It's not the ground plane, it's not a cast shadow, it's not the apple, it's not anything. It's just a shadow shape. So you're really thinking two-dimensionally. And this is going to change as I keep drawing, but for the most part, that's how it is. And I'm doing this not to make it perfect so that I can relax and say, whew, I got my drawing done. I'm doing this so I can see whether or not I'm going to keep it. Because if it's no good, see, I can already tell that's too high. All right. And also notice that I put my objects higher up. There's less space up here. If you elevate your objects, then it feels like they're more like a king sitting on a throne. If you put them too low, it feels like they're sliding off the page and they don't feel very important. It feels like, it's like when you take a picture of somebody and they're out of the frame, you're like, oh, well, delete that picture because they're not in the middle. So you want to put it basically in the middle and raised up. It just feels better if there's more space at the bottom. Okay, so I really love the negative space on my image. I might have to shrink everything down because I'm starting to paint it too much life size. All right, so next step, the drawing is somewhere close. I just want to move on because I want to get the drawing more accurate. And the background on the left side is mostly cool. So I'm mixing up just some white with the black, and then I'm pulling in some of the brown that I already have. There's not a lot of color options here. So, all right. So I'm just going to map this in. It's pretty thin and able to move around. You can see that it slides around the canvas. I'm actually not working on a canvas. I'm working on a gessoed board that's been sanded down several times. And I like the surface. It's just that I have a lot of these boards for the demonstrations that I do. So that's kind of why I'm using this. Okay, and you can also see that I'm grouping this shadow together. And to continue it across, I'm going to have to put at least a little bit of it here, even though it does get lighter. So thin washes in the beginning, thicker paint will come as you get going. Okay, so this is where I have to carve out my shapes. I was a little bit careless. And part of painting is subtracting too. You don't need to think that everything you do is an additive process. Also, notice how I'm using straight lines. That just gets the basic angle. The structure of anything you draw, you want to look for the gesture of the straight lines. It's like, basically, what's this angle? All right, I like the rhythm of this. When I say rhythm, what do I mean? I mean the levels. How low is this compared to this? So we go boom, 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 boom. Okay, so there's a rhythm, the way this relates. And I don't want the top of the pear to line up with any of these other apples. So if I drew a line across, it should be at a different level. Subconsciously, if I put the pear at the same height as the apple, it's not really symmetrical, but it's lined up too perfectly. And our brains like randomness more than organization. You know, we want a little bit of a surprise. So be mindful of how high things are on the canvas. All right. So right now I'm pretty satisfied with where I'm at. So I'm just going to keep blocking in the big masses, trying to get the value close. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. And it's going to get darker. Some of these darks are going to be darker. And the background is more red here. I may not keep it kind of this warm value. And there's a little light piece here. I'm not worried about that. I'm going to add that later on. So really, you don't have to worry about every little piece. The smaller stuff, you just kind of leave for later. Okay, so I don't have a cold red. So the only way I can make cold red is to add white to it. And that basically gives me a pink. So unfortunately, since I can't use both reds, I really want to use both reds because then I could have more warm and cool. But my apples are going to have to be unified. So the apples are going to be, for the shadow, they're going to be brownish. I kind of want to cheat and just use the other red. Should I cheat? Should I just do what you guys are doing? You want me to cheat, Sione? I'll have to go get the other colors. No, I'm not going to cheat. I'm making you guys do this. I'll do this. So that's, if you choose the other red, then maybe I should have chosen the other red. So I can't get these shadows as purplish as I want them. These are going to look like rotten apples. Maybe not. Okay, so see that shape? That's mostly what I'm seeing. This part of this apple is in the light. So I'm going to start to isolate that. Looking to connect anything else. Okay, so with a slightly smaller brush, just so I don't have to clean it out. Now I'm going to block in the vase. Now the vase is, I said that we don't get to use blue because black will look blue compared to all the warm colors. So, you don't have very many options. So this area has to be in shadow. And right away, it's incredible how blue that looks. And it's partially because I put brown or that red in with my black for the other area. So I'm already playing up the warm and the cool colors. That's going to cause problems. All right. So I'm trying to keep this mixture clean so it looks really bluish. And up here there's a lot of reflection from the apples, so I'll put that in a little bit later. There's a lot of warmth under here. So these subtle changes, you don't need to see them or put them in right away, but we'll add them a little bit later on. So one of the things you want to remember when you're painting, you don't want to leave these empty edges. You want to connect the paint as much as possible. So as you're painting along, don't be afraid to kind of connect that. So the edge disappears. You know, that's both shadows, so that's not as important as this edge where it's silhouetted against the light. So we can bring that up in focus a little bit later on. And there's some blue. I'm just looking, since my brush is full of this cold color and I only have so many options for the cool shadows. The shadows over here are pretty bluish. And what's nice is that I already have that warmish brown, so the shadows will relate to the apples in some degree. We don't want them exactly as blue as this, because that's supposed to be white. So I think it's a good thing that we have a little bit of, in fact, let's do this too. This will help the atmosphere in your painting. When I talk about draw what you see, I mean we're drawing what we see with the shapes, but draw/paint what you know. I know if I let these two colors bleed together, the image will feel more cohesive, right? It's going to give it a sense of reality that you can't really observe if you open your eyes up a lot and you're like staring at what you see. You're not going to paint it that way. So that's a little trick of draw what you know. Okay, so same thing over here. And which cast shadow do I want to make stronger? The one on this apple or this one? I say this one because it's closer to me. I want this to be my focal point. And also notice that these apples are all the same size, same shape, because they're apples. This one's bigger, but this one's the only yellow thing. So we have a grouping of three that already makes them less important because they're connected. This one is more important because it's the opposite color. It's kind of a yellow-green. So it's going to stand out. That's why I used the lemon yellow instead of the yellow ochre. Okay, enough talking. And if you want your painting to start to come together faster, you want to look for the evidence of light. So the shadow sides, I'm already starting to paint evidence of light. What I really mean is I'm going to get in here and paint some core shadows and all of that stuff, and then I'm going to put some cast shadows. So the next thing I'm going to zing in is the cast shadow edge closest to the object. That's where there's the most contrast. I heard somebody call it the occlusion. I'm like, why are we using that word? It's too confusing. Basically, it means the area where there's no light underneath the object. And when I paint these shadows, they should be similar in the angles. So if I put this one up here, I don't really see it too much like this, that angle, but I think this is going to be a better shadow. It's going to give it a better sense of light. So notice that it's all the same darkness. That's not what I want. I want there to be some atmosphere in here. So the light's bouncing around. This should be lighter and cooler, and this should be darker and warmer. And that totally got messed up. So these are the principles of how light works. If you've ever drawn a sphere in an art class, that's what they're trying to get you to understand. And I know some of you have done that in my class, but we might have to move this apple over. Okay, so that's enough of that. Now let's block in the lights. So I'll zing in. I didn't put the shadow of the pear in, but we'll get that in a second. So like I said, we're not trying to make it perfect. We're just trying to make it so we can tell if we've messed up. So we can tell if we like where we're going. There's nothing that says it has to be like the picture. There's nothing that says it has to be the way we see it. In fact, I think it would be better if we moved, you know how pears sometimes bend? I kind of feel like it might be better if we do that. I don't know. Maybe we'll just leave it. And same thing here. You can always connect any shadow side to the background because it's less important than the contrasting edge where there's light against dark. So I just put a little bit of black with my yellow. It makes a really nice green, keeping it really clean so that it looks, what am I trying to say? Just so it doesn't get muddy, so it looks a little bit more bluish and cold. I just threw a little bit of the white mixture in to cool it down a little bit. And then if I want to cool down the highlights, I just let the yellow mixture be dominated by the white. So you can see how much that's gonna work as a highlight. So what you can see is this yellow is yellow-red. It's a warm yellow. Then the highlight is more of a yellow-green. It's a cool yellow. So we have warm, cool, and then this sort of transition from the window is kind of cool. But basically we have warm side, cool side, and then within the warms, in order for the highlights to stand out, we can't make them pure yellow. It's better if we make them a little bit colder. So you have a cold highlight on a warm area for your light side. All right, so I'm just going to leave that for now. Move on to the red part of the apples. And this is really where you draw the shape that you want. So you can see we're kind of creeping up on the right shape. I've chopped it out and now I'm overlapping. And the good thing is that because this came in, I can now overlap that area and it looks like a painting. It doesn't look like I'm scared to put paint down. And I really like to paint with square brushes. It's just my thing, I guess. Okay, now you can see in order to blend things, what you do is you put the paint down where it belongs, and this is still wet. I mean, my board is soaking up a little bit of the moisture, but I'll do it again down here. We have this value, or this paint that's already wet. If I just put in some basically pure red, just where it's the most red, okay? And it just picked up that black that got ruined. There's a little black right there. Okay, so if we just put this here, and you don't want to blend this way because you'll pick up the shadow, you probably can't see, but now the tip of my brush has brown on it, and if I do another stroke, see I put brown back here. So when you're blending the paint, you want to go up and down like this, go over into that paint, and then bring it back, and that's how you create the blended area. So it's less effective to blend across because the next stroke you do, you'll put the dark in the light, and you'll mess up. Okay. Just need to reestablish my shadow. Whoa. going to try to make a purple now. So I'm letting the cool blue, let's see if this looks purple. It's as good as we can get, purple-ish. At least it looks cold. Probably the thing that most students struggle with, well, at least I've struggled with it when I did assignments like this. It's just frustrating, you can't get the color right. But in the end, you're going to get something that's better than real life. All right, it's coming along. Let's put the white part of the vase in. And for this, I'm going to use a little bit more of a stiff brush so it can hold more paint. That's way too cold. So I've got kind of a mess on my palette, and what I want to do is have some clean colors. For the light areas, you want to create pastel colors or tints. So a tint is any color plus white. So I'm making sort of a peach colored tint. I don't want it to be too colorful, but I just want it to be warm because the light on the light side is warm. So I put a little bit of red. The red will tint the paint usually a little bit stronger than the yellow will. So I keep this really clean. Don't want to make it too colorful. And you can see the difference. That's really yellow. Now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to make a tint of pink. Just pure red with the white. And you don't just pick up paint and mix it together and hope that it ends up the right mixture. Notice that I put the red to the side. And I'm probably not going to use all of that, but if I need more, I can always pull it in. See, that has a really strong tinting strength. So that's still pretty red. Notice how much white I'm using too. You notice when I started, I had huge piles of paint. Don't be afraid to use paint. The best thing, you're here to learn. I mean, unless you're like totally destitute and you're gonna not eat because you have to buy more paint. I say, don't be afraid to use paint. It's the best training you can get. Because if you add too much, you'll know how to use less. And if you don't use too much and you're always afraid to add more, then you'll never know what's needed. So don't be afraid to put some paint down. And besides, so that's really cold. I see much more warmth in here. And I don't know if the camera will show this. I'm wiping it off because the white paint is really altering the color. And I don't want that. So now I'm going to start drawing. My white's pretty dry. I can feel it dragging too much. This felt much better. Remember, you want it to be creamy and smooth when it goes down, but not too wet.